All stories are dramatized recreations. Named locations are fictionalized. Any resemblance to real persons is coincidental.
The words didn't land like a slap. They didn't slice like a knife. Those are metaphors for sudden, clean pain. This was nothing like that. This was a seismic shift, a silent, catastrophic detonation deep underground that takes a full, horrifying minute to reach the surface and split the world apart. You feel it before you hear it, a low, sickening hum in the bones, and then everything you've ever built simply ceases to be standing. Dr. Evans' office was designed to be a sanctuary. Beige walls, a large, healthy fiddle leaf fig in the corner, a watercolor of abstract waves that was supposed to calm the mind. The couch we sat on was too soft, swallowing me whole, while Daniel sat rigidly on the other end, a canyon of expensive upholstery between us. He'd suggested therapy 6 weeks ago. We've just been so disconnected, Scar. I think we need a tune-up, a neutral third party. I'd thought it was a sign of his commitment, a desperate, noble effort to save us from the slow, quiet death our marriage had been dying. I packed my hope and my heartache into a neat little box and brought it here, to this safe, beige room. Dr. Evans, a woman with kind eyes and a perpetually tilted head, had asked him about his recent stress. She pointed out his defensiveness, a pattern she'd gently noted in our previous 2 sessions. "Daniel," she said, her voice a smooth, clinical instrument, "when Scarlett expresses a need for more quality time, you often rebut with a list of your own contributions, how you handled the car registration, or your overtime at work. It feels to her like a deflection. Can you explore what might be behind that?" Daniel shifted, his knee bouncing. He was wearing the blue shirt I'd bought him for his birthday, the one that brought out the gray in his eyes. He ran a hand through his hair, a mannerism I'd once found endearing, now just a tick I clocked. I get frustrated," he began, his voice tighter than usual, "because it's not like I'm out at bars. I'm working. Last Thursday, for example, I was at the quarterly review dinner until past 10. It was brutal. Phillips went on about the Q3 projections for an hour, the steak was overcooked, and by the end of it, all I wanted was to come home and crash. He offered a small, weary smile in my direction, a peace offering. A shared commiseration about the banality of corporate life. But the ground beneath me had already begun to hum. I stared at him. The air in the room thickened, pressing on my eardrums. Dr. Evans said something, but her words were muffled, lost in the rising static in my head. Last Thursday, I saw it with a clarity that was dizzying. The storm that had rolled in over the Rockies around 6, the one that had knocked the power out for 40 minutes. I'd lit candles. Our son Leo had been scared of the thunder, so we'd built a blanket fort in the living room and read stories by flashlight. I texted Daniel at 7:45 p.m. "Power's out, Leo's a little spooked. Hope your dinner is more exciting than our adventure by candlelight." He'd texted back at 8:02 p.m. "That sounds adorable. Give him a hug. This is a snooze fest." Phillips is droning on. Probably won't wrap up for another hour. Talk then. A perfect, detailed story. Overcooked steak. Q3 projections. Phillips. The hum turned into a roar. My mouth was dry. "The quarterly review dinner?" I heard myself say, my voice strangely calm. "A tiny boat on a massive, raging sea." "Yeah," he said, his eyes flicking to me, then back to Dr. Evans. "You know how those things are." "No," I said softly. "I don't. Because the quarterly review dinner was scheduled for next week, Daniel. I have it on the family calendar." In purple pen, the silence that followed was absolute. It was the silence of the universe holding its breath. Daniel's face didn't fall. It didn't crumple in guilt. It just shut down. The weary smile vanished, replaced by a blank, terrifying mask. The mask of a man who has been caught, and who has already run through 1,000 scenarios of being caught, and has long since decided on his response, stone-walled denial. But it was too late. The lie was too perfect, too detailed. He'd rehearsed it, but he'd rehearsed it for the wrong audience. He'd built a beautiful, intricate set, but the backdrop was all wrong. Dr. Evans looked between us, her professional calm finally fissuring. "Daniel," he didn't look at her. He was staring at a point on the beige wall somewhere past my head, his jaw a hard line. The canyon between us on the couch was no longer just fabric. It was the void into which 11 years of my life were now pouring, soundlessly, irretrievably. Who is she? The question left my lips not as a scream, but as a whisper. It was the only thing left in me. His silence was the confirmation. It was the earthquake finally reaching the surface. The shelves of our life teetered and then crashed down. The trust, the shared history, the inside jokes, the Christmases, the hospital room where I'd held his hand and he'd cried when Leo was born. It all turned to dust in that silent, beige room. I stood up. The movement was robotic. I didn't look at him again. I walked to the door, my limbs heavy and foreign. I opened it and stepped out into the bland, fluorescent-lit hallway of the medical building, leaving the sanctuary and the rubble behind me. The door hissed shut on my old life. I didn't cry, I didn't scream. I just stood there, in the hallway, a woman erased. The world kept moving. A receptionist laughed down the hall. A phone rang, and my heart, my foolish, hopeful heart, didn't break. It simply stopped. It was a flat line on a monitor in an empty room. I was a technical writer, a master of details and facts. And the most important fact of my life had just been edited out of existence. The drive home was an out-of-body experience. My hands were on the wheel. My eyes registered the stoplights turning from red to green, but the person operating the body named Scarlett was gone. In her place was a hollowed-out shell, playing back a memory on a loop. Last Thursday. Phillips. Q3 projections. The power outage. The blanket fort. Each detail was a shard of glass I meticulously collected, examining it from every angle, watching it cut the nerves that connected me to the world. I didn't feel the pain yet. I was too deep in the forensic analysis of my own life's murder. I pulled into the driveway of our two-story tutor in a quiet Boulder suburb. The lawn was perfectly manicured. The geraniums I'd planted in May were a cheerful, violent red in the afternoon sun. It was a picture of everything we were supposed to be. A lie, rendered in siding and landscaping. I walked inside. The house was quiet, still. Leo was at his after-school coding club. Daniel wouldn't be home for hours. Or would he? I had no idea where he was anymore. The man I'd shared a bed with for 11 years was a stranger whose schedule was written in invisible ink. I went straight to the kitchen, my movements jerky and purposeful. I poured myself a glass of water but didn't drink it. I just held the cold glass, feeling the condensation bead against my palm, a single, tangible sensation in a world that had lost all its texture. Then, the analysis phase ended. The feeling returned. It didn't trickle in, it tsunamied. It was a physical pain, a hot, wrenching twist deep in my gut, as if my insides were being torn out. A sound escaped me, a raw, guttural thing that didn't sound human. I dropped the glass. It shattered on the hardwood floor, water and shards exploding outwards, a perfect mirror of my interior state. I slid down the cabinet onto the floor, amid the wreckage of the glass. I drew my knees to my chest and wrapped my arms around them, trying to hold myself together. The sobs came then, great, heaving waves that left me breathless and dizzy. I cried for the betrayal, for the stupidity of my own trust, for the future I had pictured that would now never happen. I cried for Leo, whose stable world I would have to break. I cried for the woman I was an hour ago, who believed a rough patch was something you could fix with communication and couples therapy. That woman was dead. I don't know how long I sat there. The sun moved across the floor. A text pinged on my phone, a reminder about Leo dentist appointment next week. The mundane, relentless march of life. It felt like a cruel joke. The sound of a key in the front door jolted me upright. My heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic bird in a cage. Footsteps in the hallway. He was home early. Of course he was. He probably left right after I did, fleeing the scene of the crime. Daniel appeared in the kitchen doorway. He'd taken off his suit jacket and loosened his tie. His face was pale, drawn. He looked at me on the floor, surrounded by broken glass, and his expression flickered. Not with concern for me, I realized, but with alarm at the mess. At the disruption. "Scarlett," he said, his voice cautious. "What happened? Are you hurt?" The banality of the question? The sheer, breathtaking audacity to pretend. I didn't move. I looked up at him from the floor, my face streaked with tears and probably mascara. I felt a sudden, icy calm settle over me. The grief was still there, a black ocean beneath me, but this new feeling was a solid raft. It was rage, cold and clear. "Get out," I said. My voice was hoarse from crying, but it didn't waver. He blinked, taken aback. What? Let me help you up. You'll cut yourself. He took a step forward. Don't you dare touch me, I hissed, recoiling. The venom in my voice made him freeze. Get out of my house. Our house, he corrected automatically, and the phrase was so ludicrous, so offensive, that a laugh, sharp and brittle, escaped me. You lost any claim to the word ours the second you started fucking your old flame, I said. The words were crude, ugly, like wanted them to be. I wanted to shatter the beige, therapeutic politeness of our earlier confrontation. I wanted him to feel the grime of it. He flinched, finally. The mask slipped, revealing a flash of guilt, quickly buried under defensiveness. Scarlett, you don't understand. It's not what you think. Stop. I cut him off, pushing myself to my feet, carefully avoiding the glass. I stood facing him, a queen on a battlefield of her own kitchen. I am a technical writer, Daniel. My entire job is to take complex, messy information and structure it into clear, unambiguous facts. So let me be clear, the fact is, you lied. You fabricated a detailed story to cover your absence. The fact is, you were not where you said you were. The fact is, you have been lying to me for how long? Weeks, months, the why is just metadata. It doesn't change the core fact. You are a liar. He stared at me, his mouth a thin line. I could see the calculations going on behind his eyes. The lawyer in him was assessing the evidence, looking for a loophole. There was none. It was a mistake, he said finally, his voice low. A stupid, colossal mistake. It didn't mean anything. It was the worst thing he could have said. To have obliterated our marriage. To have taken a sledgehammer to the foundation of my reality? For something that didn't mean anything? That made it all so much more worthless. So much more pathetic. It meant something to me, I whispered, the cold rage giving way to a pain so acute it stole my breath. Like every lie meant something. Every time you looked me in the eye and told me you were working late, it meant something. It meant you were choosing to betray me. You were choosing to betray Leo. His name in the space between us was a bomb. Daniel's shoulders slumped. And Leo, God, Scarlett, we have to think about Leo. Don't, I said, my voice cracking. Don't you dare use him as a shield now. You should have thought about him before you started this. You don't get to play the family man now. I hugged myself, suddenly freezing. I want you to leave. Tonight. Go to a hotel. Go to her place. I don't care. But you are not sleeping under this roof. Where am I supposed to go? He asked, and he genuinely sounded lost. He'd been caught, and his script had run out. He had no plan for this. That is not my problem to solve, I said, and the words were the most empowering I had ever spoken. For 11 years, his problems had been my problems. His stress, my stress. No more. That is your problem. You created it. You deal with the consequences. I turned my back on him and walked out of the kitchen. I went upstairs to our bedroom, my bedroom, and closed the door. I didn't lock it. I just stood there, listening. I heard him moving around downstairs. A cupboard opened and closed. He was cleaning up the glass. The habit of domesticity, persisting even in the apocalypse. Then, silence. Then, the sound of the front door opening and closing. I walked to the window and peered through the blinds. He was standing on the front porch, his phone to his ear, his head bowed. He was calling someone. Her, probably, making new plans. Building a new set of details for a new lie. I let the blinds snap shut. The house was mine, it was empty, and it was broken, and it was filled with the ghost of a life I no longer recognized, but it was mine. I sat on the edge of the bed, in the deepening twilight, and I made a list in my head. Not a list of my grief, but a list of actions. A protocol for survival. Call a lawyer. Figure out what to tell Leo. Well, breathe. It was a start. The days that followed were a study in surreal, brutal mundanity. It was like living in a house after a fire. The structure was still standing, but everything was waterlogged, smoke-damaged, and reeked of loss. I moved through the rooms like a ghost, performing the motions of life on autopilot. I called a lawyer. Her name was Miriam Goldstein, and she had a voice that could cut glass and a reputation for being a pit bull in divorce proceedings. Our first conversation was a clinical dissection of my marriage into assets and liabilities. The marital home, purchased in 2016. Joint tenancy. We'll need a valuation. His 401k, your IRA. We'll file a QDRO to split them. Child support will be based on his last 3 years of tax returns. We'll need those. She spoke in acronyms and legal statutes, a cold, precise language that had no vocabulary for the fact that the marital home was where I'd labored for 16 hours to bring Leo into the world, or that the asset of Daniel's 401k contained the money we'd once dreamed would buy a sailboat to retire on. She was efficiently carving up the corpse of our life, and I just sat there, nodding, taking notes on a yellow legal pad as if it were any other work project. Telling Leo was a pain I hope I never have to relive. I did it alone, on a Saturday morning. Daniel was already in an apartment, a sleek, soulless corporate rental he'd booked online. I made Leo pancakes, his favorite, with chocolate chips. He knew something was wrong. He was a smart kid, 11 years old, with eyes that saw too much. "Mom," he said, his mouth full of pancake, "is Dad on another business trip?" I put down my spatula and sat next to him at the kitchen island. "Baby," I began, my voice thick. "Dad and I, we love you more than anything in the whole world. You know that, right?" He nodded, his eyes wide and suddenly fearful. "But Dad and I, we aren't going to be living together anymore. We're not going to be married." His lower lip trembled. "Why? Did I do something wrong?" The question shattered what was left of my heart. I pulled him into a hug, holding him tight, breathing in the smell of his shampoo. "No, no, my sweet boy. You are the most perfect thing we have ever done. This is a grown-up problem. It's between me and Dad. It has nothing to do with you. We both love you so, so much. That will never, ever change," he cried. Quiet, confused sobs that he tried to stifle against my shoulder. I held him and let my own tears fall silently into his hair. We sat like that for a long time, amidst the smell of pancakes and syrup, the ruins of our family breakfast surrounding us. The paperwork from Miriam's office arrived in a thick, daunting envelope. I spread it out on the dining room table, a monument to our failure. Petition for dissolution of marriage. Summons. Declaration of disclosure. It was a universe of hurt, translated into checkboxes and legalese. Daniel and I only spoke through lawyers or via terse logistical text messages. "What day for pickup?" "I can get him at 5 on Friday. He has a science project due Monday. Don't let him forget. The water heater is making a noise. Here's the plumber's number." He was a ghost in my phone, a username that occasionally popped up to discuss the maintenance of the life he'd abandoned. The silence in the house was the hardest part. It was a physical presence, heavy and suffocating. I'd gotten used to 11 years of noise. The TV murmuring in the other room, the clatter of Daniel making coffee, the easy rhythm of two lives intertwined. Now, there was only the hum of the refrigerator and the frantic, screaming noise of my own thoughts. I tried to work. I was on a deadline for a software manual for a new project management tool. I'd sit at my desk, stare at the screen, and try to remember how to form a coherent sentence. To initiate the synergistic workflow paradigm, first ensure all stakeholders are aligned on the deliverables. The words were meaningless glyphs. How could I write about alignment when my own world was catastrophically misaligned? How could I document a functional system when my own life was throwing fatal errors at every turn? I'd end up scrolling through old photos on my phone. Our wedding day, both of us tanned and blurry with happiness. Daniel holding a newborn Leo, his face a mask of terrified wonder. A trip to Disneyland, Leo on Daniel's shoulders, both of them wearing Mickey Mouse ears. Each photo was a knife to the gut. I was torturing myself, but I couldn't stop. I was an archaeologist of my own happiness, sifting through the ashes, trying to find the point where it all went wrong. Was it a year ago, 2? Was it something I said? Something I didn't do? The questions were a hamster wheel in my brain, spinning faster and faster, going nowhere. I stopped sleeping. I'd lie in the center of our king-sized bed, my bed, and stare at the ceiling. The emptiness on the other side was a void that seemed to suck all the air out of the room. I'd check my phone at 2 a.m., then 3 a.m., then 4 a.m., then 4 a.m. The blue light of the screen was my only companion in the deep, lonely hours of the night. I stopped eating properly. A piece of toast here, a handful of cereal there. Food had lost its taste. The world had lost its color. I was a black and white photograph of myself, going through the motions. One Tuesday afternoon, I was supposed to be editing a document. Instead, I was standing in the middle of the living room, just standing there, holding a single, stray sock of Daniel's that the laundry had spat out. I don't know how long I'd been there. I looked around the room. It was tidy, but it felt abandoned. It was a museum of a life that was over. A life that had been built on a lie. The hollow feeling inside me began to shift. It wasn't just grief anymore. It wasn't just pain. It was something darker, hotter. It was pure, undiluted rage. The emotion was so violent, so sudden, that it frightened me. I needed an outlet. I needed to break something the way he had broken me. I couldn't smash the furniture. It was all part of the marital assets. I couldn't scream, the neighbors would hear. Then I remembered the parameter that had been randomized for me. Expression of grief, going to a rage room. I grabbed my phone, my hands shaking. I Googled rage room near me. There was one in Denver, a 40-minute drive away. Without thinking, without planning, I booked a session for that night. I called the teenager next door, asked if she could sit with Leo for 2 hours. She agreed. I drove to Denver in a trance. The rage room was in an industrial park, a warehouse with a brightly painted front. Inside, it was cacophonous. The sound of shattering glass and splintering wood echoed from behind heavy doors. A bored-looking kid at the counter had me sign a waiver and handed me a padded suit, a helmet with a face shield, and a pair of heavy gloves. I suited up. I looked ridiculous. I felt powerful. I was led into a small, concrete cell. In the center was a pile of junk, old monitors, a keyboard, a stack of plates, a few bottles, and a lone, ugly porcelain vase. In the corner leaned a crowbar. The door shut behind me, locking me in with the noise of other people's fury echoing through the walls. I stood there for a minute, just breathing, the smell of dust and destruction in my nose. I picked up the crowbar. It was heavy, solid in my gloved hands. I looked at the pile of junk. It wasn't junk anymore. It was his lies. It was his perfect, detailed stories. It was the phantom, Giaban, overtime, he'd never worked. It was the therapy session where my world ended. I swung the crowbar. It connected with a monitor screen with a glorious cathartic crunch. Glass splintered outwards. I screamed, a raw sound lost in the noise. I hit it again, and again. I grabbed a plate. It was the anniversary he forgot. I threw it against the wall as hard as I could. Smash. A bottle was the hotel room he booked. The crowbar reduced it to a shower of green glass. I destroyed it all. I tore through the pile with a frenzy I didn't know I possessed. I wasn't just breaking things. I was breaking the hold he had on me. I was breaking the image of the perfect wife, the understanding partner, the fool. With every swing, I was breaking the chains of my own grief. When there was nothing left but a field of glittering debris, I stopped. I was panting, sweating under the heavy suit. My arms ached. My throat was raw from screaming. I leaned against the wall, the crowbar hanging loosely from my hand. The silence in my own cell was deafening. The rage was spent. For the first time in weeks, my mind was quiet. There was no analysis, no grief, no pain. There was just emptiness. A clean, quiet, exhausted emptiness. I had reached the bottom. There was nothing left to break. I took a deep, shuddering breath. And in that emptiness, I felt the first, faint, terrifying flicker of something new. Not hope, not yet, but possibility, the possibility of starting from scratch. The emptiness after the rage room was a fragile thing. It lasted for the drive home, a quiet, numb bubble where the world seemed softened at the edges. I paid the babysitter, checked on a sleeping Leo, and fell into my own bed, sinking into a dreamless, exhausted sleep almost instantly. But you can't incinerate grief in one controlled explosion. The ashes remain, and the next morning they settled back over everything. The quiet of the house was no longer just empty, it was accusing. Every object seemed to hold a memory, and every memory was a landmine. The coffee mug Daniel had made in a long-ago pottery class. The photo on the bookshelf from a hike in Chautauqua Park. I was a ghost haunting my own life, drifting through rooms that echoed with a happiness that felt like it had belonged to someone else. The divorce paperwork sat on the dining table, a stark white monument. Miriam's paralegal had emailed, asking for a list of all our personal property. I was supposed to itemize our life, our dreams, into a spreadsheet. One fondue pot, wedding gift from Aunt Carol. One set of ski equipment, bought for that trip to Aspen he canceled for work. One king-size bed, the scene of both conception and betrayal. I couldn't do it. The task felt Herculean and obscene. Instead, I found myself in the garage, looking for a box of old tax returns Miriam had requested. I moved past shelves of camping gear we never used, and bins of Leo's old baby clothes. My eyes landed on a plastic tub labeled Scarlett's Stuff. I pulled off the lid. Inside was a time capsule from a woman I barely remembered. College textbooks, a faded sorority t-shirt, and tucked in the corner, a sleek black case. I knew what it was before I opened it. My professional-grade camera. A Nikon D850. I'd been a passionate photography minor in college, convinced I'd be a writer who took her own book jackets. Then life, and a stable job, and Daniel had happened. The camera had been relegated to documenting holidays and birthdays, and then even that had been taken over by the superior camera in our phones. I lifted it out of the case. It was heavy, solid, and familiar in my hands. I found the battery charger, plugged it in, and prayed it still worked. While it charged, I went back inside and opened my laptop. I wasn't going to look at the divorce documents. I opened a blank browser tab. The memory of the rage room was still fresh, the visceral, physical catharsis of destroying something. I didn't want to break things anymore, but I needed to feel something that wasn't this leaden grief. I needed to push my body until my mind shut up. The randomized parameter flashed in my mind. Vid, my me, age my knee, apostille. Rock climbing. Rock climbing. I'd never been climbing. I was afraid of heights. The idea of trusting my life to my own grip strength seemed ludicrous. But the very absurdity of it appealed to me. It was the antithesis of everything I was: careful, methodical, ground-bound. I Googled rock climbing gyms Boulder. The first result was the overhang. Their website promised a welcoming community for all levels. I looked at the pictures of people clinging to brightly colored holds, their bodies taut with effort and focus. They weren't thinking about their lying husbands. They were thinking about the next hold. The next move. It was a Tuesday afternoon. Leo would be at school for another 3 hours. It was now or never. I drove to the overhang, my camera bag on the passenger seat, a tiny seed of defiance in my chest. The gym was a vast, warehouse-like space with towering walls covered in a psychedelic mosaic of plastic grips. The air smelled of chalk and sweat. The sound was a low hum of concentrated energy, punctuated by the occasional thud of someone landing on the thick crash pads below. I felt immediately out of place. Everyone seemed to know what they were doing. Lithe, muscular people flitted up the walls like spiders. I stood by the front desk, a middle-aged woman in jeans and a sweater, clutching a camera. "First time?" a cheerful guy with a man bun and a sleeve of tattoos asked. "Is it that obvious?" I said, forcing a smile. He signed me up for a beginner's lesson and a day pass. He fitted me for a harness and rental shoes, tight, uncomfortable rubber things that made me walk like a duck. My instructor was a woman named Chloe, who couldn't have been older than 25, with the calm, patient demeanor of a kindergarten teacher. "The most important thing is to trust your feet," she said, as she showed me how to tie a figure-8 follow-through knot. "Your legs are stronger than your arms." People always want to pull themselves up with their arms and they get pumped, exhausted, really fast. It was a metaphor I desperately needed to hear. Trust your foundation. Don't rely on the weaker, flashier parts. She led me to a beginner's wall. It wasn't vertical but gently sloped, or slabby, in climbing parlance. "Okay, Scarlett," Chloe said, holding the rope that was attached to my harness. "I've got you on belay. You're safe. Just start climbing. Find holds for your hands and feet. Look for the next move." I looked up. The wall seemed suddenly impossibly high. The holds looked small and slippery. My heart started to hammer. This was a mistake. "I can't," I whispered. "You can," Chloe said, her voice steady and sure. just one move at a time. Don't look at the top. Look at the hold right in front of you. One move at a time. Don't look at the top. Another metaphor. My life was an unscalable wall. I couldn't think about the summit, the finalized divorce, the single parenting, the daunting prospect of ever trusting again. I just had to find the next hold. I reached up, my fingers finding a rough, textured grip. I placed my foot on a small bump. I pushed up. My body left the ground. It was terrifying and exhilarating. My world shrank to the 3 square feet of wall in front of my face. There was no room for thoughts of Daniel, no room for grief, no room for fear of the future. There was only this: the burn in my forearm muscles, the strain in my calves, the intense focus on where to place my hand next. My mind, for the first time in months, was utterly, blissfully silent. It was fully occupied with the simple, primal task of not falling. I didn't get far, maybe 15 feet up. My arms started to shake. I couldn't see the next hold. "I'm going to fall," I called down, panic rising. "Then fall," Chloe called back. "I've got you. The rope is there for a reason." I took a breath. I had to trust her. I had to trust the system. I let go. The fall was a short, gentle swing. But the rope caught me, held me secure. I dangled in my harness, spinning slowly, my heart pounding with adrenaline and relief. I hadn't crashed. I'd been caught. I lowered down to the mat, my legs wobbly. I was breathing hard and a huge, unexpected grin spread across my face. I had done it. I had been afraid, and I had done it anyway. For the next hour, I went up that wall again and again. Each time, I got a little higher, a little more confident. The physical exertion was a purifying fire. I was so focused on the micro movements, the shift of weight, the curl of a finger over a crimp, that there was no space for the macro pain. On my last climb, I paused halfway up, resting on a good hold. I looked down. The ground was far enough to be thrilling, not terrifying. The world from up here looked different. Smaller, manageable. I felt a sudden, overwhelming urge to capture this feeling, this perspective. I rappelled down, hurried to my locker, and got my camera. I didn't take pictures of the expert climbers on the soaring overhangs. I focused on the beginners. I captured the intense concentration on a young woman's face as she debated her next move. The look of triumph on a man's face as he touched the top hold. The trusting way a climber leaned back into the rope, surrendering to the belayer's control. I looked through the viewfinder, and for the first time in a long time, I wasn't documenting a loss. I was framing a moment of effort, of struggle, of tiny, personal victories. I was seeing strength where I had only seen my own weakness. I left the overhang physically exhausted, muscles aching in places I didn't know I had. My chalk-covered hands gripped the steering wheel, and I could still feel the phantom texture of the climbing holds on my fingertips. The grief was still there, waiting for me in the car. But it had changed. It was no longer a suffocating blanket. It was a thing I was holding, examining from a new angle. I had created a tiny bit of distance between it and myself. I had, for 1 hour, climbed out of the hole. I had found my first hold. The climb out of the hole was not a straight line. It was a messy, grueling, 2 steps up, 1 step back process. Some days, the grief would ambush me in the cereal aisle when I saw Daniel's favorite brand of oatmeal. Other days, a fresh wave of anger would hit when a mutual friend would ask, with pitying eyes, "How are you holding up?" as if I were a building after a hurricane. But the climbing gym became my anchor, my sanctuary. It was the one place where the rules were simple and the feedback was immediate. You either made the move, or you didn't. You trusted your gear, or you fell. There was no ambiguity, no subtext, no lies, just physics and effort. I went 3 times a week, without fail. I bought my own harness and those uncomfortable, precise shoes. The rental shoes, I learned, were called boats for a reason. My new ones were an extension of my feet. I started to recognize the regulars, the sinewy old man who floated up routes that made my tendons ache just to look at. The group of laughing college kids who treated the walls like their personal playground. The other beginners like me. Our nods of solidarity in the stretching area saying everything we didn't have words for. I progressed from the gently sloping slabs to the vertical walls. The pump, that deep, fiery burn of exhaustion in your forearms, became a familiar sensation. a feeling I learned to sit with, to breathe through, instead of panicking and letting go. I learned to flag my leg for balance, to smear the rubber of my shoe on a blank section of wall for friction. The jargon became a second language, one that had nothing to do with my old life. One Tuesday, I was attempting a route graded 5.8. It was a significant jump in difficulty for me, involving a long reach across a section with few footholds. I'd failed on it 3 times already, peeling off at the same crux move and swinging into empty air. "You're rushing it, Scarlett," said a voice beside me. It was Ben, the guy with the man bun from the front desk, who I'd learned was also one of the coaches. "You see the big hold over there," he pointed to a large, welcoming jug just out of my reach, "and you're lunging for it. You're using all arms. Stop. Look down." Frustrated, I looked down at my feet. They were perched on decent holds. "Now, before you go for the big reach, drop your hips. Get your weight directly over your right foot. Then push with your leg. Your leg is a piston. Your arm is just a hook. Let the piston do the work." It sounded so simple. Drop your hips. Let the piston do the work. I took a deep breath, shaking out my already screaming arms. I found my stance. I consciously lowered my center of gravity, feeling the strain shift from my arms to my core and my legs. I looked at the distant hold, not as a lifeline, but as a destination. Then I pushed, hard, with my right leg. My body uncoiled. My fingers slapped against the hold and stuck. I'd done it. The move felt effortless, powerful. I let out a whoop of laughter that echoed in the high-ceilinged space. "Nice," Ben called up, a grin on his face. "Now, don't blow the rest of it. Breathe." I finished the route, my heart singing with a pure, unadulterated joy I hadn't felt in over a year. As I lowered down, I realized what had happened. I hadn't just learned a climbing technique. I'd learned a life lesson. I'd been lunging for a new future, desperate to grab it and pull myself up, exhausting myself in the process. I needed to drop my hips to get centered, to ground myself in the present moment, and use the strong, steady pistons of my own resilience to move forward. My creativity, my love for Leo, my own 2 feet, they were the pistons. My frantic grasping was just the weak, tired arms. After that session, instead of heading straight home, I drove up into the foothills. It was a crisp Colorado afternoon, the sky a deep, endless blue. I pulled into a lookout point overlooking Boulder. I got out my camera. I didn't take pictures of the panoramic view. I focused on the details. The intricate pattern of lichen on a sun-warmed boulder. The way the light filtered through the needles of a ponderosa pine, creating 1,000 tiny spotlights on the forest floor. A single, tenacious wildflower growing from a crack in the stone. I was seeing the world through a new lens, literally and metaphorically. My photography was no longer about documenting a life for others to see. It was about capturing moments of quiet beauty and resilience for myself. The camera was becoming my journal. When I got home, the house felt different. It didn't feel like a museum of my failed marriage anymore. It felt like a shell, waiting for new life to be breathed into it. The divorce papers were still on the table. I sat down with a cup of tea and a red pen. I started to go through them, not as a heartbroken wife, but as a project manager. This was a QCD, a quality control document for my new life. I made notes in the margins. I asked questions. I itemized my personal property with a detached clinical efficiency. 1 fondue pot, donate. Ski equipment, sell. King-sized bed, I paused. King-sized bed, replace with 2 twins for when Leo has friends over. It was no longer an autopsy. It was a blueprint. Later that night, after I'd put Leo to bed, I scrolled through the photos on my camera. There was one I'd taken of my own chalky hand, resting on the rough texture of a climbing hold after I'd finally sent that 5. Root. The focus was sharp on the white dust and the faint scrapes on my knuckles, the wall a blur of color behind it. It was a picture of strength, of effort, of proof. I transferred it to my laptop and set it as my desktop background, replacing the default mountain landscape that had come with the computer. Every time I opened it to work, I would see that image. A reminder that I could do hard things. That I could find holds where there seemed to be none. That the pump was just a feeling, and it would pass. I was no longer the woman crying on the kitchen floor. I was the woman who dropped her hips and trusted her pistons. The descent was over. The long, slow, arduous ascent had truly begun. I was building a new foundation, one secure foothold at a time. And for the first time, I was starting to believe it would hold my weight. Mastery is a quiet thing. It doesn't arrive with fanfare. It seeps into your bones when you're not looking. A silent accumulation of 1,000 small repetitions, 1,000 tiny failures that eventually, almost reluctantly, coalesce into competence. The climbing gym was no longer a sanctuary I fled to. It was a second home I belonged in. The grades on the routes I could climb had steadily ticked upwards. 5.9, then 5.10a. The numbers were arbitrary, but the progress was not. My body, once soft from years of desk work and domestic contentment, was now a map of lean muscle and definition. I had calluses on my fingers and a permanent dusting of chalk under my nails. I loved them. They were my medals of honor. I'd even started lead climbing, learning to clip the rope into quick draws as I ascended, managing the very real fear of a longer, more dangerous fall. It was a lesson in trust, not just in my belayer, but in my own ability to place the gear correctly, to assess risk, to be responsible for my own safety in a way that felt profoundly empowering. One Saturday, a group from the gym was organizing a trip to El Dorado Canyon, a world-renowned climbing spot just outside Boulder. Real rock. Outside. It was the natural, terrifying next step. "You should come, Scarlett," Chloe said, tightening her ponytail. "You're more than ready. It's a whole different game out there." The thought sent a bolt of pure fear through me. The gym was safe, controlled, the holds brightly colored and obvious. Real rock was unpredictable, gritty, and merciless. But the woman who had cried on the kitchen floor was receding into a distant memory. In her place was someone who looked at fear and saw a route to be climbed. "Okay," I heard myself say. "I'm in." The morning of the trip dawned clear and cool. The air in the canyon was thin and smelled of pine and dry stone. I stood at the base of a route called Bastille Crack, a classic beginner's line, but to me, it looked like Everest. The rock face was immense, ancient, and intimidating. The holds weren't neon plastic. They were cracks, ripples, and tiny edges you had to search for. My stomach was a tight knot. I chalked my hands obsessively. "You've got this, Scarlett," Ben said, giving me a reassuring pat on the shoulder. "It's just like the gym, but with better scenery and worse holds. Remember to breathe. And trust your feet." I tied into the rope, my fingers fumbling with the familiar knot. I took one last look at the world below, the tiny cars in the parking lot, the specks that were other climbers, and then I turned to face the wall. The first move was the hardest. The rock was cold and rough against my palms. It demanded a different kind of attention. I had to read the rock, see the lines and features that would take my weight. I moved slowly, deliberately, my world shrinking to the few square feet of granite in front of me. Find a handhold. Smear a foot. Push. Breathe. Halfway up, I hit a difficult section. The crack I was following pinched out, and the face was suddenly smooth. I searched frantically with my fingers but found nothing. Panic, that old familiar foe, began to claw at my throat. My arms started to scream. I was going to fall. I was going to peel off this rock and everyone would see me fail. "Drop your hips," Ben's voice echoed in my head. "Let the piston do the work." I forced myself to stop, to breathe. I leaned my forehead against the cool stone, closing my eyes for a second. I wasn't in the canyon. I was in my life. This was just another crux move. I had to find a way through. I looked down, not in fear, but to reassess. And then I saw it, a tiny ripple, no bigger than a dime, for my right foot. It was nothing, but it was something. I carefully placed the edge of my shoe on it, pressing my weight down, trusting the friction of the rubber. It held. It gave me just enough elevation to reach a small crimp hold for my left hand. It was agony on my fingertips, but it was enough. I moved past the section. The rest of the climb unfolded in a flow state. My body knew what to do. Move, breathe, trust. The higher I got, the more the world fell away, until it was just me and the rock and the rhythm of the ascent. And then there were no more holds to find. My hand slapped over the summit ledge. I pulled myself over the top, collapsing onto the flat, sun-warmed rock, my chest heaving, my heart pounding with a wild, exuberant joy. I was on top of the world. I sat up, my legs dangling over the edge. The view was breathtaking. The entire canyon sprawled out below, the city of Boulder a distant dream in the flatlands beyond. The sky was a vast, impossible blue. The air was so clear, I felt I could see forever. I started to laugh, a free, uninhibited sound that was carried away by the wind. I had done it. Alone, with my own 2 hands and my own stubborn will, I had climbed a mountain. The tears that came to my eyes this time weren't from grief. They were from an overwhelming sense of my own capacity. I was capable of hard, beautiful, terrifying things. I wasn't Scarlett, the betrayed wife. I was Scarlett, the climber, the photographer, the survivor. The descent, a walk-off down a back trail, was anticlimactic and perfect. My feet were back on solid ground, but I felt different, lighter, taller. The world seemed sharper, more vivid. The green of the pine trees was greener. The warmth of the sun on my skin was a personal benediction. That night, after a long, hot shower, I looked at myself in the bathroom mirror. The woman looking back had sunburn on her cheeks and a light in her eyes that had been absent for a very long time. There were lines around her eyes that spoke of recent pain, but her expression was calm, resolute. The grief was still a part of me, a scar on my heart, but it no longer defined me. It was just a piece of my history, like the faint white line on my knee from a childhood fall. It was proof that I had been hurt, and proof that I had healed. I was happy. Not the performative happiness of social media, or the desperate happiness of someone trying to convince themselves. It was a quiet, deep-down happiness that came from knowing, truly knowing, that I was enough. That my own 2 hands were all I needed to pull myself up. I was whole, alone, and for the first time, the idea of being with someone else wasn't a necessity to feel complete. It was a possibility that would require them to be worthy of the wholeness I had built for myself. I had reached the summit of the first, hardest climb, and the view from the top was worth every painful step it took to get there. Happiness, I discovered, was not a final destination. It was a weather pattern in the climate of my new life. Some days were clear and sunny, filled with the simple joy of a difficult project completed at work or a laughing pizza, and movie night with Leo. Other days were overcast, with a dull ache of loneliness that would roll in, unexpected and thick, usually in the quiet of an empty evening. But the storms of all-consuming grief were gone. The weather inside me had stabilized. I was no longer afraid of the clouds. I knew they would pass. My life had found a new, comfortable rhythm. Work, climbing, weekends with Leo, photography had become my meditation. I'd wander around Boulder with my camera, not seeking anything in particular, just practicing the art of seeing. I took pictures of peeling paint on old barns, the intricate geometry of fire escapes, the way light hit a puddle after a rain. I was collecting moments of beauty, building a portfolio of a life I chose, rather than one that happened to me. It was on one of these weekend excursions that the randomized parameter of my story clicked into place. P. R. First in making trip. He's the guide on a hiking trip. A group of photographers I loosely followed online was organizing a sunrise hike to Bear Peak. The promise of capturing the first light hitting the Flatirons was too enticing to pass up. I signed up, more for the photography than the socialization. We met in the pre-dawn darkness at the trailhead, a shivering group of 20 or so people clutching tripods and coffee thermoses. Our guide was a man named Eli. He was introduced by the organizer as a local naturalist and an expert photographer himself. When he stepped into the beam of the headlamp to give the safety briefing, my first thought was that he looked like he was carved from the very mountains we were about to climb. He wasn't overly tall, but he had a solid, capable build that spoke of years spent outdoors. His face was weathered in a way that suggested smile lines, not age. He wore a worn beanie and a practical jacket, and his eyes, even in the dim light, were calm and observant. "All right, folks." His voice was a low, steady rumble, perfectly suited to the quiet of the sleeping forest. "The trail is rocky, and it's dark. Watch your step. We're going to take it slow. The mountain isn't going anywhere, and the sunrise will wait for us if we're late. Safety first, photos second. The sunrise will wait for us." It was the antithesis of every high-pressure corporate mantra I'd ever heard. I liked him immediately. We started up the trail. I hung near the back, content with my own thoughts and the rhythmic crunch of my boots on the path. The group slowly stretched out, the faster hikers pulling ahead, the slower ones lagging behind. As the sky began to lighten from black to a deep indigo, I paused to adjust my camera settings, and when I looked up, I realized I was alone. Not lost, just separated. I could hear voices ahead and behind, but they were distant echoes. A flicker of unease went through me. I picked up my pace, rounding a bend in the trail, and my boot caught on a hidden root. I stumbled forward, my arms flying out to break my fall. My camera, thankfully strapped around my neck, bounced against my chest. I landed hard on my hands and knees on the rocky path, a sharp jolt of pain shooting through my wrist. "Whoa there. You okay?" The voice came from just ahead of me. Eli was sitting on a large boulder off to the side of the trail, a thermos in his hand. He hadn't been ahead, he'd been waiting, ensuring no one got left behind. He was instantly at my side, his movement fluid and quiet. "I'm fine," I said, embarrassed, pushing myself up. I brushed the dirt from my knees, my face flushing. "Just clumsy, too busy looking at the light and not at my feet." "Easy mistake to make," he said, his tone neutral and kind. He didn't try to help me up, which I appreciated. He just offered a steadying presence. "It's a beautiful morning. The light is doing incredible things. Let me see your wrist." It wasn't a command, just a gentle suggestion. I held out my right wrist, which was already starting to throb. His hands were warm and capable as he gently probed the bones. "Doesn't feel broken," he said after a moment. "Probably just a nasty sprain. You might have a hard time holding your camera steady for a bit." He reached into his pack and pulled out a bandana. "Here, it's clean. We can make a makeshift ice pack when we get to the summit. There's still some snow in the shadows. For now, just keep it elevated." He fashioned a simple sling for me, his movements efficient and practiced. I was struck by his calmness. There was no drama, no fuss. Just a problem presented and a quiet, competent solution offered. "Thank you," I said, my voice a little breathless from the fall and his unexpected proximity. "Part of the job," he said with a small shrug. "I'm Eli, Scarlett." We started walking again, this time together at the very back of the group. He matched my pace without comment. The silence between us was easy, not awkward. He didn't feel the need to fill it with chatter. As the trail steepened, we fell into a natural rhythm. I was impressed by his knowledge. He'd point out a specific bird call or name a particular alpine flower pushing through the rocks, all without breaking stride. He spoke about the landscape with a reverence that was contagious. We reached the summit just as the sun crested the horizon. It was a spectacular explosion of orange and pink, painting the granite slabs of the flatirons in fiery light. The rest of the group was a frenzy of clicking shutters and excited murmurs. I fumbled with my camera, my injured wrist making it difficult to maneuver. Frustration bubbled up in me. I'd come all this way for this moment, and now I was going to miss it. "Here," Eli said softly. He came to stand beside me. "May I?" He gestured to my camera. I hesitated for a second, then nodded. He took it gently, his fingers brushing against mine. He adjusted the settings with a few quick, confident clicks, then handed it back to me. "Try that." I lifted the camera and looked through the viewfinder. The exposure was perfect. The highlights weren't blown out, the shadows held detail. I took a few shots, my heart swelling at the beauty in the frame. "Thank you," I said again, lowering the camera. I'd have overexposed the whole thing trying to do it left-handed. "You're welcome," he said. He wasn't looking at the sunrise anymore. He was looking at me, a thoughtful expression on his face. "You see things differently." "What do you mean?" "Most people," he said, nodding toward the group who were all capturing the exact same wide shot of the panorama, "they see the big picture. And it's beautiful. But I saw you on the trail. You were taking pictures of the frost on a leaf. The pattern of the lichen. You're looking for the details everyone else misses." His observation was so accurate, so unexpected, that it left me speechless. Daniel had never noticed how I saw the world. He'd just expected me to see it his way. We stood there for a long while, watching the colors shift and change, the world waking up below us. It wasn't romantic. It was peaceful. A shared, quiet appreciation of something beautiful. On the hike down, we talked. Not about anything profound. About our favorite trails, the best spots for afternoon light, the absurdity of mountain weather. He was easy to talk to. He listened. Really listened, his calm presence making me feel oddly comfortable. At the trailhead, as the group dispersed with cheerful goodbyes, he handed me a card. It was simple, just his name and number, in case the wrist gives you more trouble, or if you ever want a less eventful hiking partner who won't let you fall behind. I took the card, a small, curious smile on my face. I'll keep that in mind. I drove home, my sprained wrist aching, but my spirit feeling lighter than it had in ages. I hadn't been looking for anyone. I was whole, alone, and content. But meeting Eli felt less like a search and more like a discovery. Like finding a particularly interesting and beautiful detail on a well-traveled path. A detail I'd missed before because I'd been too busy looking at my feet, or at the distant horizon, but never at the space right in front of me. It was just a meeting. A conversation. A card. But it felt like a crossroads. A new, unexpected trail leading off into the unknown. And for the first time, the unknown didn't look frightening. It looked interesting. The card from Eli sat on my kitchen counter for a week. It was a simple, matte white rectangle with his name and number in clean, dark type. It wasn't a demand, just an offer. An open door. I looked at it every morning while making coffee, a tiny, curious anomaly in my otherwise structured routine. I didn't call. I wasn't ready for the complexities of a date, the unspoken expectations, the pressure to perform a version of myself that was ready to move on. My peace was too new, too precious, to risk on something that felt like a gamble. But the memory of that sunrise hike, of his calm presence, lingered. So, after 8 days, I did something that felt safe. I sent a text. It was neutral, factual, a direct reference to our shared experience. "Hi Eli, it's Scarlett from the Bear Peak hike. My wrist is much better, thank you. No permanent damage to the photographer." I put the phone down and busied myself with making lunch, half expecting and half hoping for no immediate reply. But my phone buzzed within minutes. "Scarlett, glad to hear it. The mountains are safer when all photographers are operating at full capacity." A pause. Then another message. "Found a great horned owl nest near the Mesa Trail yesterday. The fledglings are getting big." It wasn't a request for a date. It was an observation, a sharing of something he thought I might find interesting because I saw details. I found myself smiling. That's amazing. I've only ever heard them. Their calls sound like something from a mystery novel. They do. If you're free Thursday late afternoon, they're most active then. I could show you. No falling this time, I promise. It wasn't dinner. It wasn't drinks. It was birdwatching. It was a shared interest. It felt easy. That Thursday, we met at the trailhead. It was comfortable, familiar. He nodded a hello, his eyes crinkling at the corners, and handed me a pair of binoculars. Loners. Better than a bandana sling, we walked. And we talked. This time, it was deeper. He asked about my photography, and I found myself telling him about my technical writing job, the strange poetry of translating chaos into clear instructions. He listened, genuinely interested, and I realized with a start that I was talking about my work without the layer of bitterness that had coated it for so long. He told me about his own path, leaving a corporate job in environmental consulting to become a guide and naturalist. "I just wanted my hands in the dirt," he said, his voice quiet. "I wanted to point things out to people, not just chart them on a graph for a report." I told him about climbing, about the focus it required. He nodded in understanding. It's a meditation. You versus the rock, and the rock doesn't care about your ego. It's the most honest relationship you can have. He showed me the owl nest, high in a ponderosa pine. We stood in silence for a long time, watching the two fluffy, grumpy-looking fledglings peer over the edge of their stick-and-needle home. Their parents were nowhere to be seen, trusting them to be safe, to learn. It felt like a sign. We started hiking together regularly. It was never formally planned. He'd text a photo of a wildflower in bloom or mention a trail he was scouting, and I'd find a way to join him if I could. We explored canyons and ridges I never knew existed. He taught me how to identify animal tracks in the mud, the difference between a lodgepole and a ponderosa by the bark. One Saturday, he proposed a longer hike to a remote alpine lake. The randomized parameter of our story manifested perfectly, maybe HDDS, hiking with a poorly folded map. He take Maniches, hiking with a poorly folded map. He'd printed out a topographical map from online, and it was a mess of creases, folded wrong by an impatient printer. We stood at a trail junction, squinting at it, trying to orient ourselves. The trail marker was faint. "I think we go left," I said, pointing to a contour line on the map that seemed to indicate a gentler slope. "The sun's in the west, so that means this creek." He turned the map sideways, then upside down, his brow furrowed in concentration. "Is actually over here? Maybe?" We looked at each other and burst out laughing. Here was this incredibly capable outdoorsman, utterly defeated by a piece of paper. It was endearing. Human. "We could just use the GPS on our phones," I suggested, grinning. "That feels like cheating," he said, but he was laughing too. "All right, fine, but we're not telling anyone. We figured it out together, a combination of his innate sense of direction and my methodical, detail-oriented reading of the landscape. It was a partnership, a meeting of different skills. There was no ego, no one needing to be right. Just two people, slightly lost, finding their way together. And that's what it felt like. We were finding our way. The conversation naturally drifted into more personal waters. I told him about Leo, my voice full of a love that was pure and uncomplicated. He talked about his own family, his sister's kids, his love for being an uncle. He never asked about my past directly. He didn't need to. He seemed to understand that it was a country I had left, and I didn't want to be a tourist there anymore. He met me where I was, in the present, on the trail, behind a camera lens, in a quiet laugh shared over a stupid, poorly folded map. The positive trait that had been randomized for him was proving to be true. Misty she's on frange, is incredibly patient and frange and calm in stressful situations. I saw it when we encountered a startled snake on the path. He just calmly guided me around it. When a sudden rainstorm soaked us to the bone, he produced a spare trash bag to protect my camera and made a joke about free laundry. And when I talked about the frustrations of co-parenting with Daniel, whole pair and he just listened, without offering unsolicited advice or judgment. He was a steady, calm presence. A deep, still lake, after years of navigating turbulent, unpredictable seas. One evening, after a long hike, we were sitting on the tailgate of his truck, sharing a thermos of hot chocolate as the stars began to prick through the violet sky. The silence was comfortable, filled with the chirping of crickets and the distant yip of a coyote. "I really enjoy this," he said quietly, his voice blending with the twilight. "I enjoy you." It was a simple statement. No pressure, no grand declaration, just a fact. I looked at him, his profile outlined against the darkening sky. I felt no anxiety, no frantic questioning of what it meant, no fear of the future. I just felt happy, peaceful. "I enjoy you too, Eli," I said, and the words felt true and light. He smiled, a slow, warm smile that reached his eyes. He didn't try to kiss me. He just nodded as if we'd confirmed something important and passed me the thermos. The rhythm between us wasn't a frantic, passionate drumbeat. It was something slower, deeper, more sustainable, like the rhythm of breathing, or the rhythm of your heart on a calm, steady hike when you know the path, and you trust the person walking beside you. We had found our rhythm, and for the first time, the idea of a duet didn't scare me. It felt natural. It felt like the next logical step on a beautiful, unfolding trail. Introducing a new person to your child is like adding a new element to a carefully balanced ecosystem. You hold your breath, hoping it won't throw everything into chaos. You hope the new element will be a nutrient, not a toxin. Leo had met Eli once in passing after a hike, a quick, awkward hello in a parking lot. But this was different. IB&DT of reading. This was a planned afternoon. This was intentional. My stomach was a knot of nerves. I wanted Leo to like him. I needed Leo to feel safe above all else. Eli, to his credit, understood the gravity completely. "We'll keep it low-key," he'd said. "No pressure, just hanging out." The plan was a hike to a waterfall Eli knew, followed by pizza. A classic, foolproof combo. When Eli pulled up, he didn't come to the door. He texted me, "Here when you're ready." It was a small thing, but it meant everything. He was giving us our space, not invading it. Leo and I walked out. Leo was quiet, observant, clutching his water bottle like a shield. "Hey, Leo," Eli said, getting out of his truck. He didn't loom. He leaned against the door, making himself smaller, less threatening. "I hear you're a pretty good hiker." Leo shrugged, a classic preteen response. "It's okay. This one has a cool cave behind the waterfall. If the water level isn't too high, we can maybe check it out." That got a flicker of interest. A cave was better than just a waterfall. "Yeah?" Leo said. Okay, the drive was quiet, with me making stilted small talk in the front seat. Eli kept it light, pointing out rock formations and telling a silly story about a marmot that had stolen his hat once. Leo stayed silent in the back, but I saw him watching Eli in the rearview mirror. The hike was where the magic happened. The trail was rugged and Eli naturally fell into step beside Leo, not me. He pointed out things, a hawk circling overhead, the specific type of sandstone that made the cliffs so red. "See that?" Eli said, pointing to a patch of loose gravel on the trail. "That's called scree. It's tricky. Best to plant your foot solidly each time, like this." He demonstrated, his movement steady and sure. Leo watched, then mimicked him, his small face set in concentration. "Perfect," Eli said, and it was just a simple word of encouragement, but it wasn't patronizing. It was respectful. "You're a natural." I hung back a few steps watching them. My two worlds, the old and the new, walking together. My heart felt too big for my chest. Eli didn't try to force a conversation. He just shared the trail, and the silence between them became comfortable, filled by the sound of their footsteps and the rushing water growing louder in the distance. The waterfall was spectacular, a white curtain of water plunging into a crystal-clear pool. And true to his word, there was a space behind it, a damp, echoing grotto you could walk into. "Whoa!" Leo breathed, his eyes wide. The cool mist coated our faces. "Want to go in?" Eli asked. Leo nodded, a real, genuine smile breaking through his usual reserve. We ducked behind the rushing water into the hidden space. The world outside vanished, replaced by the thunderous roar and the shimmering curtain of water in front of us. It felt like a secret world. Leo laughed, a sound of pure delight that was swallowed by the noise. He looked at me, then at Eli, his face alight with wonder. In that moment, the last of his guard came down. After the hike, covered in a fine layer of dust and mist, we devoured pizza at a picnic table. Leo, fueled by fresh air and pepperoni, became a chatterbox. He told Eli about his coding club, about a video game he was obsessed with. Eli listened, asking thoughtful questions, never talking down to him. I just watched. I listened to the easy rhythm of their conversation. I saw the way Eli looked at Leo, not with the performative interest of someone trying to impress a mother, but with a genuine, calm curiosity. And I saw the way Leo looked back, with a dawning respect. The randomized trait was not just a parameter on a screen, it was alive in this moment. Is incredibly patient and calm in stressful situations. This was a high-stress situation, and his calm had been the anchor that allowed Leo to feel safe enough to let him in. Later, after we dropped a sleepy, happy Leo off at his dad's for the night, Eli and sat on my porch steps. The lights of Boulder twinkled below us. "He's a great kid, Scarlett," Eli said, his voice soft. "Really smart, funny too. Thank you for today," I said, my voice thick with an emotion I couldn't name. "For how you were with him. It meant everything. He's a part of you," he said, as if it were the simplest truth in the world. "How else would I be?" It was the right answer. The only answer. The divorce was final the following week. The papers arrived in a thick, legal envelope. I signed where the yellow sticky notes indicated, my hand steady. There was no fanfare, no dramatic relief, no fresh grief. It was a formality. The emotional divorce had been finalized months ago in a beige therapy office and a concrete rage room. I drove to Eli's place after. He lived in a small, modest house on the outskirts of town, tucked against the foothills. It wasn't what I'd expected. I guess I'd imagined a rugged cabin, but this was a home. It was neat, comfortable, with a well-tended vegetable garden in the back and a porch swing. He didn't say anything when he saw me. He just opened his arms and I walked into them, burying my face in the soft flannel of his shirt. He held me as I finally cried. Not tears of sadness for what was lost, but tears of release for what was finally, officially over. He was calm, he was patient, he was my anchor, and in that moment, on the porch of his quiet house, with the solid bulk of the mountains behind us, I knew this was the foundation I wanted to build on. Not a frantic, passionate inferno that would burn hot and fast, but a deep, steady warmth that would last through any winter. The next randomized parameter clicked into place. Mountain cabin, mountain cabin. It wasn't this house. It was something we would find together. We started talking about it that night, curled up on his couch. It wasn't a dramatic proposal. It was a conversation. A what if? A maybe we could look for a place with more land for Leo to explore, a place with a bigger porch for that swing, a place with a view of the stars unobscured by city lights, a place that was ours, a new foundation for a new family. The dream was no longer just mine. It was ours, and it felt not like a fantasy, but like a plan. The next, logical, beautiful step on the trail we were walking together. The search for our mountain cabin was our new shared obsession. It was no longer just about finding a house, it was about finding the right setting for our new symphony. We spent weekends driving winding dirt roads, following cryptic real estate listings that promised seclusion and charm, which often translated to leaky roof and no cell service. We saw places that were too big, too small, too dark, too remote. But with each one, we refined our vision. We didn't just want a house in the mountains. We wanted a home that felt like a natural extension of the landscape, a place of warmth and light nestled in the ruggedness. Leo was our chief consultant. His requirements were specific. It needed a cool rock to climb on nearby and trees good for a treehouse. Eli's were practical, good southern exposure for solar panels, a reliable water source. Mine were emotional. It had to have a feeling of peace the moment you stepped inside. And then we found it. It was at the end of a long, unpaved road, tucked into a stand of aspens and blue spruce. It wasn't a grand cabin, but a modest, sturdy structure of logs and stone with a metal roof. A wide porch wrapped around two sides, and a creek, a real, babbling, ice-cold creek ran along the edge of the property. The key was under a mossy rock as the owner had instructed. The three of us walked inside, our footsteps echoing on the pine floors. The main room had a high, beamed ceiling and a massive stone fireplace. Sunlight streamed through the windows, illuminating dust motes dancing in the air. It was empty, but it wasn't hollow. It felt, waiting. Leo immediately ran to a ladder that led to a sleeping loft. "This can be my room," he yelled, his voice full of excitement that bounced off the walls. Eli walked to the large window over the sink and looked out at the view of the Indian Peaks wilderness, his hands resting on the sill. "The light in here is incredible," he said, almost to himself. Morning, noon, and evening. It's a photographer's dream. I stood in the center of the room, turning slowly. I could hear the creak through the open door. I could feel the solidness of the logs. I could see Leo's imaginary life here, and Eli's quiet contentment, and my own creativity unfurling in the space. This was it. This was the foundation. We bought it. The process was a whirlwind of paperwork and inspections, but it felt light, joyful. We were building, not dividing. Moving day was chaos, but it was our chaos. Eli's truck was filled with boxes, my car stuffed with linens and kitchenware. Leo was in charge of directing traffic, wielding a clipboard with a badly drawn map of where things should go. The first night in the cabin, we were exhausted. Boxes were piled everywhere. We had no furniture except a mattress on the floor and a single camping chair. We built a fire in the great stone fireplace, its crackle and pop the only music we needed. We ate takeout pizza off paper plates, sitting on the floor in a circle around the hearth. The warmth from the fire soaked into our bones. The flames cast dancing shadows on the log walls, making the unfamiliar space feel intimate. Ours. Leo, full of pizza and excitement, fell asleep with his head in my lap, a contented sigh escaping his lips. Eli and I sat in comfortable silence, watching the fire. He reached over and took my hand, his fingers lacing through mine. His palm was calloused from years of handling ropes and rocks, a familiar, comforting texture. "It's good, isn't it?" he said softly, his eyes reflecting the flames. I looked around at the boxes. at my sleeping son, at this good, solid man beside me, at the shell of the home we would fill with our lives. It was more than good. It was a profound, deep-down rightness. "It's perfect," I whispered back. The months that followed were a symphony of small, domestic moments that composed our new life. The randomized parameters wove themselves into our days seamlessly. P over to his DA, say HT ask, say HT over to say 2. Hiking with a poorly folded map became a staple of our weekends. We explored every trail around our new home, often with Leo leading the way with a map he'd drawn himself, which was, without exception, poorly folded and wildly inaccurate. We got lost regularly and it became a joke, a cherished part of our routine. We'd eventually find our way, usually by following the creek or the position of the sun, laughing about our terrible navigation skills. P over to he is incredibly patient and calm, was the steady bass note of our symphony. I saw it when I was stressed about a work deadline, and he'd simply bring me a cup of tea and take Leo out to skip rocks on the creek. I saw it when Leo was struggling with preteen angst and Eli would sit with him on the porch, not lecturing, just listening, his calm presence a balm. He was the still point in our turning world. My life was no longer a solo climb. It was a harmonious blend of three voices. There were moments of dissonance, of course, a missed communication, a stressful day, but they were fleeting. The overall composition was one of joy, of partnership, of a family consciously, lovingly built. I often found myself pausing in the middle of a task chopping vegetables for dinner, stacking firewood on the porch, just to listen. To the sound of the creek, a constant, soothing soundtrack. To the sound of Eli and Leo debating the best way to build a birdhouse. To the profound silence of the mountains at night, a silence that felt full, not empty. I had reached the summit of my own personal mountain, and instead of finding a lonely peak, I had found a vast, beautiful valley where I could build a home. The woman who had been shattered in a beige therapy office was now whole, surrounded by the vibrant, messy, glorious colors of a life she had chosen, a life she had built, one hold, one hike, one moment of courage at a time. The symphony of our new life was playing, and it was beautiful. Peace is not the absence of noise. It is the presence of a harmony so deep that the noise simply doesn't matter anymore. That's what our life in the cabin had become. A rich, complex harmony. The years had been kind. They had added not lines to my face, but depth to my smile. The cabin was no longer just a house. It was a living, breathing entity, its log walls infused with the echoes of our laughter, its windows framing the ever-changing masterpiece of the mountains. Leo was 16 now, all lanky limbs and a dry wit that constantly kept us on our toes. He'd long outgrown the treehouse Eli had helped him build, but it still stood in the aspens, a silent sentinel to his childhood. His relationship with Eli was one of the great joys of my life, a bond of mutual respect and easy camaraderie that had nothing to do with biology and everything to do with choice. One crisp autumn afternoon, the air was sharp with the scent of pine and wood smoke. The aspen leaves were a blinding, brilliant gold, shaking like a million tiny coins in the breeze. It was the kind of Colorado day that felt like a gift. I was on the porch, setting up my tripod. My camera was no longer just a hobby, it was my passion. I'd started a small, successful business selling fine art prints of the Colorado wilderness, a perfect marriage of my technical eye and my love for this land. Eli came out, holding 2 mugs of steaming hot chocolate. He handed one to me, his fingers brushing mine, a familiar and beloved contact. He looked out at the golden vista, a contented sigh escaping his lips. "It's a good day," he said, stating a simple fact. "It is," I agreed, smiling at him. The final, randomized parameter of my story had manifested in the most beautiful way possible. P over to its, one child, gender neutral. Our daughter, River, was 2 years old. She was a wild, joyful creature with Eli's calm eyes and my stubborn determination, a living embodiment of the love that had built our family. As if on cue, the screen door slammed and River toddled out, clutching a fistful of yellow aspen leaves she'd undoubtedly scavenged from the ground. She was a bundle of puffy blue jacket and muddy boots, her cheeks rosy with the cold. "Mama, look. Pretty," she announced, thrusting the crushed leaves toward me. "So pretty, my love," I said, kneeling down to her level. The most beautiful leaves. Eli scooped her up, settling her on his hip. She immediately tucked her head into the crook of his neck, a gesture of utter trust and contentment. He began to point out a Steller's jay that had landed on a nearby branch, his voice a low, soothing rumble as he named the bird for her. In that moment, the light was perfect. The late afternoon sun slanted through the golden leaves, casting a warm, ethereal glow on them. It caught the silver in Eli's hair, the delicate curve of River's ear, the absolute adoration on his face as he looked at her. My breath caught. This was it. This was the portrait I didn't know I'd been waiting my whole life to take. I moved quickly, quietly adjusting my camera. I didn't direct them. I didn't ask them to smile. I just wanted to capture the truth of them. The truth of us. Eli, I said softly. He looked up from River, his eyes meeting mine over her head. And in that look was everything. It was the memory of 1,000 sunrises hiked together. It was the patience through my healing. It was the steadfast love that had built this home, this family, this life. It was a piece so profound it felt like a force of nature. I pressed the shutter. Click. The sound was soft, but it seemed to hang in the crystalline air, a period at the end of a long, beautiful sentence. I lowered the camera and looked at the preview screen. The image was breathtaking. It was more than a photograph. It was a feeling rendered in light and color. It was love, made visible. Eli walked over, River still on his hip, and looked at the screen. He was silent for a long moment. "That's the one, Scarlett," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "That's the one," he was right. It was the culmination of every heartbreak, every struggle, every hard-won victory. It was the answer to every question I'd sobbed into my kitchen floor. It was the proof that an ending could be the most beautiful beginning. I looked out at our view, at the majestic, unchanging mountains that had witnessed my transformation. Then I looked at my family, my thoughtful, growing son somewhere inside the cabin, my wild-hearted daughter, the calm, strong man who had chosen to walk beside me. The upgrade was complete. I-Day was complete. It hadn't been about becoming a new person. It had been about uncovering the person I was always meant to be, resilient, whole, and capable of a love that was deep, steady, and unshakable. I was no longer just a climber or a photographer or a survivor. I was Scarlett, I was loved, I was home,